11 p.m. and Danny was out in the shadows hunting for a fantasy. He found an isolated house occupied by a gorgeous young blonde. He sat, watching. Finally, the woman headed to bed. It was midnight. It was Enad who wanted to enter the house. It was Enad who wanted the woman to escape. Enad prepared to enter the house when Gemini took him, hungry for rape and thirsty for blood. But then, as Gemini prepared to sexually assault and kill the terrified woman, he saw her. The woman's 8-month-old baby staring up at him and smiling. This was the last time that Gemini could be jarred out of his murder sentence. It was by the eyes. Welcome to SKP, Accepted Serial Killers. I'm your host, Caroline, University Biology Professor, and I'm thanks for joining me. We left Danny on November 4th, 1989, following the murders of Julie Grissom, Tom Grissom, and Sean Grissom. By December of 1989, Danny was still living in Shreveport. He had run into an old friend at a bar, and this friend helped Danny get a job with a local telephone solicitation company. About a week after he started, some cops showed up at the telephone solicitation company. They were looking for another employee, but Danny acted inappropriately nervous. He was demanding to know who they were looking for, so it struck people as a little bit strange. A few days before Christmas, Danny was terminated from this company for poor performance. But in January of 1990, Danny got a job with Truman Cooley doing electrical work. This didn't last long, and eventually Danny was laid off from this job. In mid-April of 1990, Danny started dating a woman named Georgette Eaton. But according to Georgette, the relationship between her and Danny was very short and it was volatile. In fact, she said that Danny made her feel like she was dirty. Right after Danny and Georgette would have sex, Danny would get up and take a shower, and so that made Georgette feel like he thought she was really dirty. Around this time, Danny had made some rich friends, a couple named Clausen. He met them at a local bar. He ended up doing some work for them, handyman work for them, and eventually they invited him to attend a birthday party there on April 19th. True to form, Danny grabbed his guitar and he sang and played for all of the guests at the birthday party. One of the Clausen's friends approached them and warned them that there was something wrong with Danny. Clausen
Jeannie went down to the creek to fetch a bit of water. She'd been singing since. Jeannie went down to the creek to fetch a bit of water. Wonder where she's been. Way down on my
On April 27th, 1990, Danny was in a bad car accident. The car flew about 16 feet into the air, and as it flew through the air, it hit a telephone pole head on and basically got sliced in half. Danny was somehow ejected from the car, but he suffered a pretty severe head injury. Now, a head injury at 36 years of age is not as big of a deal as a head injury would be before you turn, somewhere around 25. However, when there's all sorts of other issues happening with an individual, having been put into solitary confinement, having antisocial personality traits, all of these things would only be exacerbated with a head injury. In May, Bunny Mills helped Danny get a job at Bowman Diesel, but Danny was fired after he threatened the owner with a shovel. So it seems pretty apparent here that Danny's antisocial behaviors were not going to stop. On May 16, 1990, Danny was arrested for possession of marijuana. Then, on May 17, 1990, Danny and James got into an argument over whether or not Danny should put the car window up. Seems like a reasonable And of course, the most reasonable response would be for James to pull a gun on Danny. fired the gun into the air, and with that, Danny left the house. James locked the door, but Danny had gone outside to retrieve a gun that he had stashed away behind the garage or a barn or something. Danny got back to the door and he kicked in the back door and he yelled, "You want to shoot it out, old man?" And then he shot his father in the head and the stomach, and he left. James was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Danny went to his friends, the Clausens, but he didn't go there for their help. He went there to rob them so that way he could escape. They tried to calm him down, and it appeared that they had done so. They even called Danny's mother to see if James was alive. Danny was apparently furious that his father had lived. He started jumping up and yelling that James should be dead. The Clausens gave Danny about $30, a warm jacket, and some food, and with that, Danny took off. By June 2nd, Danny had made it to City, Kansas, and he robbed a house. While he was in the house, he stumbled across some identification papers for a man named Michael Kennedy Jr., who was born in 1949 and was dead. So he stole this man's identification papers so that way he could use this guy's identity. By June 12, 1990, Danny had made his way to Kansas City, Kansas, and it was at 10 p.m. that same night that Danny robbed the Westwood United Superstore. He got away with about $1,600. And then on June 30th, Danny tried to rob the same store, but this time he didn't get as much money. He drove across the state line to Kansas City, Missouri, because Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, it's like one big city that crosses between, it's like right on the border between Kansas and Missouri. Sometimes they're considered the same city, sometimes they're considered different. Once he was in Kansas City, Missouri, he robbed a Sunfresh grocery store and he made off with close to $9,000. Somewhere between Kansas City, Missouri and Boulder, Colorado, Danny met up with a man named Steve, who was reportedly, according to Danny, a driver for some up-and-coming mobster type. And it was with Steve that Danny smoked cocaine for the first time, so he smoked crack for the first time. Eventually, he made his way to Boulder, Colorado, and he was sleeping outside in a sleeping bag when he saw a pretty young blonde jog by. Danny had been asleep in his sleeping bag with no clothes on. So after the pretty young jogger had disappeared over the foothills, he stood up, got out of his bag, and he said it was then that Gemini stood up naked on the hill with his knife, slashing into the air with his knife and laughing. Gemini reached down and pulled up his pants. He gazed around and he looked for his victim. Gemini, or Danny, was hiding down by some water so that he could ambush the girl when she ran by him again. As he stood up, he startled her, but she then recognized him from having seen him a little bit earlier, and he smiled at her, and she smiled back. So then as she started to run on again, Gemini, Danny, jumped out behind her and grabbed a knife, and then grabbed his knife, and then grabbed her by the arm. And he flung her down onto the ground and prepared to attack her with his knife in hand. Well, this girl was not about to let Danny do anything to her that day. So she started to fight back, and she punched him in the face and punched him everywhere she could. It actually got a couple of really good hits in. But then Gemini lost it and beat her something terrible. And in Danny's book, let me just read this paragraph to you. Quote, "When Gemini tasted blood in his mouth, he went into a rage. Thud, 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 thud. Blow after blow rained down on the once beautiful face, staring in shock at him." End quote. He told her she was going to die. He turned her over onto her stomach and bound her hands behind her back with gray tape. And she started to cry and asked, why are you doing this? You're a good-looking guy. You don't have to do this. She was pleading to him from her bloody, messed up face. She made one last effort to gain her freedom and screamed no. For some reason, that snapped Danny back to himself, and he felt like, well, I mean, how terrible does a serial killer feel? But he turned her back over onto her, where he untaped her, turned her back over, and apologized to her and said he didn't mean to hurt her. This girl knew that it was Danny Rawling that had assaulted her that day. She must feel pretty lucky for having been one of the few people to escape she was able to escape Gemini. From here, Danny made his way back towards Florida. He stopped in Gainesville on July 9th to call his mother, but then after that, from like July 17th to the 22nd, he stayed in Tallahassee, which, so if you know anything about the the way Florida's set up, there's the Panhandle where Tallahassee, Fort Walton Beach, Pensacola, all those things are, and then there's the lower part where Miami is, and then in the center of Florida is Orlando. So Gainesville is about 4 or 5 hours from Miami, and it's probably 2 or 3 hours from Tallahassee. While Danny was in Tallahassee, he stayed at a motel under the stolen identity of Michael Kennedy. On July 18th, Danny bought another K-Bar knife, and then July 22nd, he headed down to Sarasota. Once he was in Sarasota, he had quite the time, it seems like. On July 25th, he went and got a new glasses prescription under the name of Michael Kennedy. He bought a gold chain and a violet amethyst ring. On July 26, 1990, Danny went to the Brown Derby Lounge and he asked the bartender out, but she declined. She declined his advances. At one point, it must have been that same day, he went to Burdines. And Burdines is like it's a department store. I don't think they still have them in Florida. At least they don't on the West Coast where I am now, but they were, there was lots of them on the East Coast and up in Tallahassee and all throughout. But it's just like a department store, like a Dillard's level department store. But he bought some expensive clothes there. It seems as though he made friends with the salesman at Burdines. So he hung out that day after he bought a bunch of stuff from the salesman at Burdines. He hung out and waited for the salesman, whose last name was Ford, to get off work. And then Danny invited him to dinner and told this guy that Danny had made like $10,000 by selling a song. A couple days later, Danny showed back up to Burdines, and Danny, Ford, and then Ford's roommate all went out clubbing together. Danny and Ford seemed to have hung out quite a bit while Danny was in Sarasota. Danny eventually went back to that Brown Derby, asked out the bartender again. Her name is Terry Cousins. But this time she agreed to go to dinner with him. They went out a couple of times after that, but she would later say that she saw a dark side of him pretty quickly. While he was in Sarasota, he also went out with a woman named Layla Grossman a few times. Layla was interviewed about a year after she had met Danny, and when she talked to the police about her physical relationship with Danny, she would describe it as her having to be the aggressor, and that Danny never pushed himself on her. If she declined a particular sex act, that he didn't force her to do it, that he seemed almost timid. And although they'd been intimate a few times, but they hadn't had penetrative sex. I don't know if that's because Danny wasn't able to perform or what the story is, but that seems to be the case with a lot of these serial killers, is that they can't perform under normal sexual circumstances. So they have to do really horrible, violent, vile things in order to become excited. Danny's experiences with all of these people in Sarasota had left him resentful. He felt like as if these friends were only interested in him for his expensive spending habits, which is funny because he's the one that was offering to take people to dinner, buying people things, and bragging about money, and then he was resentful that people only seemed interested in money to spend. In his book, Danny would claim that he had lots of wild and crazy sex with lots of people when he was in Sarasota living as Michael Kennedy. And that's kind of hard to believe because, most of these serial killers, when you dive into their sexual history, there's always some sort of sexual dysfunction when it comes to normal normal consensual sex. On August 4th, 1990, Danny sat in a Sarasota hotel, and he began to flood his tape recorder with his songs of heartbreak, of running from his mistakes, of his loneliness and confusion. His words, his music spoke of his inner torment, a childhood devoid of love. The following is an excerpt from this tape that police would later find at a campsite. I tried to clean up the audio as best I can, but as you can tell, I'm an audio novice, and I'm slowly trying to learn how all this audio stuff works.
Princess, angel, devil from hell.
So he'll walk it like a man. I don't know what kind of man does the things that he's about to do. It was right around this time that Danny robbed a grocery store in Sarasota. He went in and he got a bunch of money from them. Then he had to, well, according to him, he had to undertake this very difficult escape where he was scaling walls, swimming across a stream, doing all these crazy things. He made off with about $1,700 from that robbery. That night after the murder, he'd gone back to the hotel he was staying at and changed into black clothing, got his knife, and went out on the hunt for a female victim, somebody to unleash his rage upon. He wandered into a neighborhood. Danny was drawn to a house that was really well lit, and as he got closer to it, he saw that it was occupied by a pretty young brunette. He saw her watching TV in the living room. He waited for a while, watching her, waiting for the perfect time to get into the house. After she got done watching a TV show, she got up and turned the TV off and went out for a couple of hours. Once she went out, Danny broke into her house and waited for her to return. When she came back to the house, she had no idea Danny was in there waiting for her. So he just sat and he waited and he watched. She messed around in the kitchen for a little bit and then went to the bathroom. When she went to the bathroom, she left the door open and he watched her as she urinated. When she stepped out of the bathroom, he jumped out at her and grabbed her, pulled her hands behind her back and taped her wrists and was going to put thumb cuffs on her, but she asked him not to. As the rape went on, eventually the girl switched tactics with him. At first she was telling him that she was scared and asking him to hurry up, but then she switched tactics and pretend like she was enjoying herself. She told him that she would not call the police, and for some reason Danny didn't kill her. He was more, as he said, more Enad that night than Gemini, so he didn't kill her. She put on a robe and they went to the kitchen. She asked him if he wanted a beer, and he said, yeah, that would be great. And of course she told Danny, according to him, she asked Danny, well, why are you doing this? You're so good looking. Who knows if that's true or not about it. He gave her the little thumb cuffs he was going to use on her as a gift before he left, and promised her he would never do anything like that again. Danny made it to Gainesville by August 18, 1990. And under the name Michael Kennedy, he checked into the University Inn. He would stay there from August 18th through August 23rd, 1990. On August 23rd, 1990, Danny decided he needed to kill 8 people, one for each year he spent in prison. He had already killed 3, Julie Grissom, Tom Grissom, and Julie's nephew Sean, in 1989 in Shreveport. So he only had 5 more victims to go. Danny recorded this right before he went out to begin his murder campaign.
Can you hear myself? I can hear myself. Wow. Well, I'm in a different place than the last time I recorded. Now I got the sky for a blanket, the earth for a bed, and some rumpled up clothes for a pillow. But it's okay. It's just the way it is. You take the good with the bad. And you know, at the first of this recording that I did, I don't know, I just, my heart was real heavy, and I was toting a cold and trying to get over that. And so, you know, the guitar playing wasn't all that good, and my timing was off, so, because I wasn't feeling good. But at any rate, I just wanted y'all to have something to remember me by. Listen to those crickets. Man. Well, I don't know, you know. I'm making do, but kind of lost for words. I really am. I'm just sitting here thinking about what to say. I really don't know what to say. I do know this much. I love you. I know we can't ever be together. But at least there's one consolation. At least I'm free. At least I'm healthy. I know I'll have to run the rest of my life. But I'm getting pretty good at it. If that means anything. Shoot, I've been stopped by the police I don't know how many times, checking IDs and stuff. Oh. I guess I'll make do. Hope I do. Mom, I love you. And listen, I know you're a lot stronger than you make out to be. You'll get along okay without me. I wish that it wasn't so. I'd love to be there by your side. But, you know, it's just like the little lion cubs. They grow up one day and they go off on their own. Well, it's just the way it is. I don't want you feeling sorry for me. I don't want you worrying about me. I'm a big boy. I can take care of myself. So I don't want you to worry about me, okay? I'll be alright. We're all down here for just a breath anyway. Kevin? You better get a deadgum deer for me with that bow I got you now. Yeah, just go a couple of times and see if you don't get lucky with it. Take it out in the backyard and practice with it when you ain't got nothing else to do before deer season comes up this October. And give it a shot. just make sure that you put on some, camouflage, good camouflage, because, when you're going bow hunting, you got to have camouflage. And I'll tell you something else, too. Aim for the lungs, straight through the rib cage. Either there or the heart, but the best thing to do is hit the lungs. It's the best shot for a deer. It's straight through the lungs. He don't go very far. Don't chase after him when you hit him, when you stick him. When that arrow hits him, what you got to do is you got to just watch which way he goes, and when he's out of sight, listen. You'll hear him banging into trees and stuff, and then finally you'll hear him either fall down or you'll hear him stop running. He'll stay right there until he bleeds to death if you don't go and chase him. So what you need to do is after you stick him is just sit right down there for about 30 minutes to an hour. It just depends on how you feel about it. That is, if you're going to ever do any deer hunting. I never could get you interested in it when you and I was able to go. You just, I don't know, it just didn't interest you. Well, brother, I'm hanging in there. Yeah, I'm hanging in there. I'll say that much for myself, for the moment. Plan on going the distance. I'll give it my best shot. Well, Dad, I hope you're doing better. It's probably don't want to even hear from me. Pop, I don't think you was ever really concerned about the way I felt anyway. No, I really don't. You never would take time to listen to me. I'm going to sign off for a little bit. I got something I got to do.
Jingles rolling down. Ooh, black stallion, you bring a grin. Dressed in snake hide, warm black leather.
Sonia Larson was an 18-year-old freshman who moved to Beach studying elementary education. In high school, she was an honor student. She played softball, and she was a member of Students Against Drunk Driving. Christina Powell was a 17-year-old from Jacksonville, Florida, who wanted to be an architect. Christina played softball and volleyball, and she helped write her high school's literary magazine. The girls met in student housing over the summer and decided to get a place together when they did not get on-campus housing. They found a place in Williamsburg Apartments. If you're interested in seeing sort of the map of where the victims lived, where Danny's campsites are, or where Danny's campsites were, as well as the memorial wall, all those pictures are on my website at www.skbpod.com, and just go to the blog page. Sonia and Christina were last seen on Thursday evening, August 23rd, 1990. This was 1990, before cell phones. I mean, cell phones were around, but they were these giant bricks, and only people that had them were super, super rich people or drug dealers. By Sunday, August 26th, one of the girls' parents had called the maintenance man at the Williamsburg Apartments because they were concerned since they hadn't heard from their daughter, in several days. Trigger warning: if you're sensitive to descriptions of crime scenes, etc., then I would stop listening now and fast forward all the way towards the end, because the next big chunk of this episode is going to be talking about what happened at each crime scene. So the maintenance man called the police, and the police came out to Williamsburg's apartment. The police officer that showed up, his name was Officer Barber, he ended up breaking down a door to the apartment. He found Sonia Larson's body on an upstairs bed and Christina Powell's body on the living room floor downstairs. The entry point was the dining room. The dining room had a door that was warped and it didn't lock or close or open properly. So the crime scene that this officer walked into was pretty horrific. I want to read to you some passages from for Danny Rawlings' appeal, the initial brief that was filed for his appeal. And this is just describing what officers found at Christina and Sonia's place. So upstairs, an undamaged bra was found placed neatly across some books on the top of some shelves in the room where Larson's body was found. A bag of clothing containing a gray t-shirt, which appeared to have blood on it, was found above Larson's left knee. Her panties were against the closet door. Larson's shirt, which was pulled up around her neck, had multiple sharp tears that were consistent with the wounds on her body. The major portion of the blood on the bed was 2 to 3 feet above Larson's head. There were indications in the blood that something had been dragged through it after the injuries were sustained. Downstairs, a pair of shorts were found in the hallway between the kitchen and dining room. A bra and a bra strap were found near Powell's feet, along with the contents of a purse. A yellow shirt was found at Powell's head. Blood on the shorts was consistent with Powell's blood type. Blood on the shirt was consistent with Larson's blood type. A 2-inch void of blood or anything else on Powell's wrist indicated that she was bound during the attack. So she was probably bound with duct tape that then was removed right after the attack. The medical examiner stated that Sonia Larson died of multiple stab wounds. In her right arm, there were 4 thrusts that went completely through the arm and 3 puncture wounds. There were 5 stab wounds. These were closely grouped through the right breast, which penetrated the lungs and the heart. There was a 4-inch wound beneath the left breast, and beneath that a smaller stab wound of about 1 inch in length. Approximately 2 quarts of blood had accumulated in the left pleural space, which is just a quick explanation here. So your lungs, they have a sac that surrounds them, and that sac has fluid in it, and that's the pleural space in between the actual lung and like where the inside of your chest plate would be sitting. So all that blood, 2 quarts of blood in that space is a lot, and that if she wasn't dead from something else, then that could have very likely killed her. On the front surface of her left thigh was a slash measuring about 5 by 2.5 inches. The medical examiner thought that the wounds were made with a fairly large knife, at least 1 inch thick. At the autopsy, Hamilton suggested, and so he was the medical examiner, he suggested that the candidate would be a Marine K-bar knife. In the medical examiner's opinion, the whole group of injuries could have occurred in a very short blitz-style attack in less than half a minute. Larson probably lost consciousness very rapidly within a minute, if that long. Although Larson's t-shirt was pulled upward, exposing her chest, the shirt had slits or tears corresponding to the injuries on her body, indicating that the shirt was on the body in a normal fashion when she was stabbed. So I think what they're getting at here is that she was not sexually assaulted. It appeared that she'd been pulled down to the edge of the bed after the attack and draped over the edge of the bed frame. Christina Powell had a cluster of 5 stab wounds to the mid-back with perforation of the right lung, ligature marks on both wrists, small bruises on her right and left legs, and a superficial cut on the right wrist. The wounds appeared to be made by the same weapon used on Larson. 2 wounds had short wound tracks. 2 entered the lung, one of which was 7.5 inches in length. Another wound track entered the right pleural space but did not puncture the lung, probably because the lung had already collapsed. Associated with this wound was an accumulation of blood in the right pleural space. Powell did not die as quickly as Larson and may have been conscious for a few minutes, perhaps a little bit less. A towel and a bottle of dish detergent were between Powell's legs, and a sticky fluid was found in the whole pubic region. Okay, so here's what they think happened. The girls had been at Walmart shopping, and Danny had seen them there and followed them home. Once Danny broke into the girls' apartment, and this is according to Danny out of Danny's book, The Making of a Serial Killer. He said that he could not decide which girl he wanted to attack first. He decided to kill Sonia so that he could take his time raping Christina. He says he stabbed Sonia in the chest as he covered her mouth with duct tape. He said she fought back for maybe 30 to 45 seconds. And he stood over her and he watched and waited for her to die. God, that's awful. And then he said, brace yourself, the murder gave him an erection. So after he killed Sonia, he went downstairs and he overpowered Christina and taped her hands behind her back. He cut her t-shirt up the middle and then cut the bra off that she was wearing and ripped her panties off. He said he sexually assaulted her by playing with her naked body, and she cried and begged him not to hurt her. He said he forced her to perform oral sex on him before he actually inserted himself into her. And when she cried out in pain, he told her, quote, "Take the pain, bitch," end quote. He then taped her mouth shut and proceeded to tell her that he was going to kill her and cut off her nipples. Leaving Christina in terror, Danny dumped the girls' purses out and looked around the apartment for other items to steal. So he hadn't killed Christina yet at this point, according to him. He let her sit there and suffer as he wandered around the house and looked for things to steal, and then went to the kitchen, ate a banana and an apple. He returned to Christina, turned her onto her stomach, and then stabbed her in the upper back, flipped her back over, removed her breasts, placing them in a plastic bag to take with him. Then he remembered something that his father had said, so he got a bottle of dish detergent and he cleaned Christina's pubic area. So following that, then he went and cleaned himself up, and he took time to pose both women in an incredibly shocking manner. Christina, he left face up with a notebook under her head, her breasts removed and spread eagle. Sonia, he cut off her panties, and then he dragged her to the end of the bed, posing her with her knees bent and her legs spread open. His next victim, Krista Hoyt, was an 18-year-old from Archer, Florida. Krista was to start school at Santa Fe Community College, and she got a job as an overnight clerk at the Alachua County Sheriff's Department. Her goal was to become a crime lab technician. On Friday, August 24th, Krista Hoyt and her Aunt Joy had gone to IHOP to visit Krista's mom, because Krista's mom worked there. And it was here that Danny saw her. So Danny obviously followed her back to her place. And then he went back that night at about 8 o'clock. And he stood out back and he watched and waited for her. But Krista had gone to a party that night. And her mother was spending the night. Krista was spared one more night. On Saturday, August 25th, Krista went to play racquetball with her friend. While she was gone, Danny broke into her apartment to wait. Sometime around 10 p.m., Krista came home and she was surprised by Danny when she went into the bathroom. So according to Danny, he beat her and he stabbed her. And as he killed her, he ejaculated. He then cut her from pubis to sternum. He cut off her nipples and he set them next to her body, and then removed her breasts, putting them in a towel on the bed. As he was about to assault the dead girl by ejaculating into her mouth, he decided instead to decapitate her and place her head on a bookcase in the living room. Jesus. When Krista's answering machine picked up a call, while Danny was still there, it spooked him and he took off. This must have been about 4 o'clock in the morning, because there was a woman who was awakened by the sound of somebody running past her apartment. Sonia and Christina's bodies were discovered on August 26th, somewhere around early afternoon. Tracy Pauls and Manny Taboda were friends from high school and college, and had just moved in together to share. Manny lived in. They were just friends. Tracy was 21 and studying pre-law. Manny was 22 and studying architecture. He also worked as a bartender at the Moose Lodge. Tracy was a beauty queen, and Manny was a former football player, 200-pound, 6'3" football player. Tracy had been out of town, I think visiting her boyfriend in Miami. She came back to Gainesville on the 26th of August at about 6:30. She came back to her place at Gatorwood Apartments. On that same night, on August 26th, around 10:30, a couple of girls in the Gatorwood apartment buildings would later report that they heard rattling on their apartment door. At around 12:30 on August 27th, Tracy called her sister, Tisha Jackson, and this is kind of interesting, just a strange coincidence. I guess really not that strange because it's not like Gainesville's some huge town. But Tracy's sister, Tisha, worked at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, and this is also where Krista worked. They talked for a few minutes, and then Tisha had to get back to work. And by this time, news of Sonia and Christina's murders had started to spread. But Tracy wasn't really worried too much about it because she lived with this big tough football player guy. Krista Hoyt was supposed to be at work on August 27th at midnight. When she did not show up, Tisha called her supervisor to let her know that Krista had not come in. Krista was an incredibly reliable employee, so her coworkers were very, very worried when she didn't show up to work and when nobody could get her on the phone. So shortly after she had not arrived for work, a sheriff's deputy went to her place to check. He made entry into the apartment. He found Krista's head just as Rawling had hoped. Rawling had put her head on a bookshelf so that it was facing out, so whoever walked into the room, that's the first thing that they would see. So around the time that Krista's body was being discovered, Danny was watching Tracy Pauls. Manny got home from work that night around 2 a.m. And at 3 a.m., Danny pried open the sliding glass door of the apartment. Danny didn't see Manny go into the apartment. When Danny made entry into the apartment, and as he went in, he was really surprised to find that there was a guy there. And Manny was asleep in his bed. So Danny decided that he would stab this guy while Manny was asleep. He stabbed Manny so hard, in fact, that the knife tore through one of the man's thoracic vertebrae. So the thoracic vertebrae are the ones that are in your torso, from about where your collarbones are down to the end of your ribs. He stabbed right through this guy's thoracic vertebrae. This should have killed Manny, but instead of dying, Manny fought back. And he almost knocked Danny out, but unfortunately, Danny was able to win the fight by continuing to stab Manny. He ended up stabbing Manny 31 times before Manny died. Tracy was hearing all of this commotion, and she opened her door and saw Rawling. She screamed and ran back to her room and locked the door, but Rawling kicked the door open. When Tracy saw him, she looked at Danny and she said, "You're the one, aren't you?" And Danny replied, "Yeah, I'm the one." Tracy started screaming, and her screaming was heard by a bunch of people in the apartment building. But people in the apartment complex just chalked it up to students partying too loud. So Danny taped Tracy's hands behind her back, and right before he taped her mouth shut, she told him he was going to be caught. She was wearing only a t-shirt, which Danny cut off of her. He told her what he was going to do to her, and he played with her much like he did the others, but then he turned her over and, brace yourself, he anally raped her and then stabbed her over and over again in the back. Danny then dragged Tracy's body into the hallway between the bathroom and the living room, and he posed her her legs spread eagle in a very lewd position. He then went to remove the tape from her, and he realized that she wasn't dead yet, so he got a washcloth to clean the blood from her face, and then he raped her again. He then got a towel from the bathroom and he propped Tracy's hip ups on it and then cleaned her genitals with detergent. He said he waited and watched as she died, and it took her a long time to die. He went through the apartment, he looked for stuff that he could steal, and eventually after Tracy died, Danny left and he jumped into the complex's pool to clean himself off. On Monday morning, August 27th, Danny robbed the First Union National Bank at gunpoint, and this is less than a mile from Krista Hoyt's. The money that he stole contained dye packs, and so I guess what they do is they put dye packs and they place them in stacks of $10 or $20 bills, and then when the bank robber tries to open up the bundles of money, the dye breaks and it stains all of the money. So then banks know that that the money was from a bank robbery. Something like 75% of banks in the U.S. use these kind of dye packs to dissuade bank robbers. By August 28th, 7 a.m., Tracy's boyfriend, Chris, the one that she had just come back from seeing in Miami, was in a panic because he couldn't get a hold of her. He asked a friend of Manny's to go check on them, and Chris also called the apartment manager. So the apartment manager and Manny's friend went to the apartment, and they entered Manny and Tracy's apartment, saw Tracy's body, and so they left immediately, and then they locked the door behind them, and they went to call the police. When they got back like 5 minutes later with the police, the front door was unlocked, and a dark-colored bag that had been on the floor above Tracy's head was gone. Later, it would be theorized that Danny had left his bag there and barely escaped when Manny's friend and the apartment manager had come to check on them. And when they left to go call the police, Danny got back in, or was still in the house, and grabbed his bag and left, and didn't lock the door like they did. So by this point, panic had really set in Gainesville. And like I said, I think in the first episode, I lived in Coral Springs, which is on the East Coast. I went to high school and stuff there, and I remember when this happened, and it was terrifying. My friends that had gone off to college all came home. It was really a scary time. The police were canvassing the area, and some of the neighbors in the apartment complex started to point the finger at a young man named Ed Humphreys. In the meantime, on August 28th, which was that Tuesday, police were patrolling the area near Krista Hoyt's apartment complex, and they saw two men lurking in the woods, near where Krista lived. The police stopped them, but Danny was able to get away. So Danny was one of them. Danny was able to get away because he was very athletic. The police eventually found his campsite, and at the campsite they found the cassette player and cassette tape, which is where all of the stuff that I've been playing throughout the episodes, all the music and the spoken stuff from Danny Rawling is all from that tape, that cassette tape. That's why the quality is so bad, because some of it was recorded outside by a campfire on a late 80s cassette player, which if you're much younger than I am. The other thing the police found at that campsite was the bag of money from the bank robbery that the dye had exploded on. So they knew that whoever had been at that campsite was connected to the bank robbery, but they hadn't put together yet that the murders and the bank robbery were connected. So as the days continued following the murders, there were a number of sort of odd things that occurred. On August 30th, 1990, University of Florida student Christopher Osborne returned home after playing tennis to find that his TV was on, the door was wide open, there were dishes in the sink, and evidence that somebody had watched a Playboy videotape, played with his puppy, and stole his car. By August 31st, thousands of students had left UF, and more than 700 of them did not return. September 1st, 1990, Tampa. Larry Dale Lawrence and Holly Jo Paula returned home from a weekend camping trip to find that their home had been broken into. And here's what was stolen: a Nikon 35mm camera, $10 in change, an unused knife sharpening stone, black leather wallet with credit cards, and 2 birth certificates for Anthony James Lawrence. And while Danny was in Tampa, he robbed a save-and-pack. He barely got away. On September 2nd, Danny broke into a house owned by a woman named Janet Boss. He called his mother and he called Bunny. He left an elastic in the bathroom with strands of his hair still attached. So like back before they had scrunchies and things, you would just use a rubber band or an elastic band like that in order to pull your hair back. He stole their 10-speed bike. And then he went and found a house that was under construction, and he spent the night there. By September 4th, Danny meets Diana, an artist who invites him to spend the night at her place. I can't even imagine the horror that woman must have felt when she found out later that he was the Gainesville Ripper. On September 5th, Danny went to a strip club in Tampa, and according to him, he hooked up with 2 strippers who he then, they went back to a hotel together to party and smoke crack. The strippers robbed him, which was awesome. September 6th, Danny went back to the club to get even with the strippers who robbed him. But instead, he ended up breaking into the apartment of Reynaldo and Patricia Rio. While he was there, he ate a banana. He took a couple of watches, and then he stole their 1983 Ford Mustang, and he headed towards Ocala. September 7th, Danny robbed a Winn-Dixie grocery store in Ocala, but the cops responded really quickly, and Danny ran. He evaded them with the Mustang until he ended up hitting a couple of elderly women who were sitting at a stop sign in their car. He got out then and he ran through an insurance office and into a flea market. And the flea market was just lousy with elderly Floridian ladies. So the cops finally caught up to him and he surrendered. Then he sat in jail. On September 25th, 1990, DNA test results indicated that the same man left his semen at 2 of the crime scenes. At that 3rd crime scene, Danny may have just done a good job of cleaning up any bodily fluids that he may have left behind. So at this point, Danny's wanted for bank robbery, although they don't know it was him yet. They don't know that the person that they're looking for is named Danny Rawling, nor do they know that he was the Gainesville Ripper. So he was on the run from the law.
Without a rhyme, a man named Jesse chose a life of crime. He's gonna be won by his only sign. He's a desert dust.
Tenants at the Gatorwood apartment complex were pointing a finger at a young man named Ed Humphreys, as I mentioned before. So who is Ed Humphrey, and why on earth would people point to him as being the Gainesville Ripper? Well, he was born October 5th, 1971, to Elna and George Humphrey in Boston, Massachusetts. His father went to Harvard Business School. Reportedly, there was pretty severe marital issues between his parents. His father wanted a divorce, but his mother did not. His father drank and was abusive to his mother. Ed had a lot of trouble sleeping. He wet the bed up until much later than normally happens. He had nightmares and he was a sleepwalker. He was a very intelligent guy. Well, is a very intelligent guy because he's still alive. He went to Melbourne High School, Melbourne, Florida, not Melbourne, Australia, and he was an A student. He had a really close relationship with his maternal grandmother because his father was not around and his mother was an alcoholic. At age 15, Ed contracted mononucleosis, and his moods changed abruptly after that. I'm not so sure that these are connected. I tried doing some research to see if there had been studies that connected mood disorders to having had infectious mononucleosis. The most I could find, there was a study from 1980 that made some connection or correlation there, but I was not able to find a whole lot of really good information that says, yes, this is something that's documented and can be directly linked to having had mono. If you read any of the descriptions of Ed's behavior at this time, it sounds like he was incredibly manic, and he actually did get diagnosed with manic depression, which now it's called bipolar disorder, but it used to be back in the 90s. It was referred to as manic depression. He was committed to a hospital and treated at one point. As he continued through high school after this hospitalization, he went to go live with his older brother George, who was about to begin law school at University of Florida. But while Ed was living with his brother, his behavior got out of control again, and he was eventually hospitalized. He moved back to Melbourne with his grandmother and his mother, and he went back to high school. Ed would not take his medication regularly, and as a result, well, I don't know if it's a direct result, but he became very argumentative, and he was also very interested in violence, in the military, in knives. Once he was back in Melbourne with his grandmother and mother, he had another episode, and he was hospitalized and then stabilized again. Eventually, Ed finished high school, and he went back to Gainesville. He finished a summer session just like Sonia and Christina had. And after that summer session finished, he went back to Melbourne, but his behavior became irrational again. Ed went back to school for the fall, and he moved into the Gatorwood Apartments. He was only there for a short time, but quickly he gained a reputation for his behavior, and eventually he was kicked out. On August 16th, 1990, Ed and his grandmother were looking for apartments. They found a place at Hawaiian Village, and one morning he began to wander, and he talked with security officers about wanting to go to Iraq and kill people. So when people were questioned about Ed's behavior around this time of the murders, the people or the manager from the apartment complex had reported that there was some bizarre stuff going on in what he had talked about. Then on August 24th, 1990, Ed had his worst episode yet. At 1:30 in the morning, he went into a Roy Rogers and became irate when he was told that they were out of gravy when he ordered biscuits and gravy. He told the two women working that he'd been awake for 5 days. By 4:15 p.m., Ed was at Gatorwood Apartments trying to get his bike unchanged. Apparently, he had lost the key to the lock. So this placed Ed at the Gatorwood Apartments on August 24th between 4 and 4:30 p.m. At 9 p.m., Ed was seen at the Central City Lounge and was refused entry because he was underage. And when he was refused entry, he began to threaten everyone. Shortly after this, he confronted a group of 5 men and threatened to kill them, telling them he was doing recon. So it sounded like he was having a really severe episode. Later on that same night, after 9 p.m., Ed ran into a girl he knew from school at the Krispy Kreme, and she sat with him for a while. When she got up to leave, he began to refer to himself as John and told her how crazy he was. So all that behavior was happening up until from, August 16th through the 24th and up through the 27th. And by, Monday, August 27th, Ed showed up at the Hawaiian Village Apartments at 6 a.m. and he scared the manager there. He walked into the laundry room where she was doing some laundry before, the day got started. And, he really startled her. She asked him if he was okay, and he nodded. So he walked off, or wandered off. He called his grandmother later, and he screamed at her about how he could not find his car. On that same phone call, Ed told his grandmother that there was some guy in Gainesville that was killing people. Ed's grandmother was concerned about the car, so she called campus police about Ed's car and asked them if they would go check on Ed for her. So at about 2 p.m. on August 27th, a couple of officers went to check on Ed. They found 2 legal-sized pieces of paper on his front door that were addressed to the Gainesville Sun. While the police were there, Ed began to talk about how he wanted to go to Panama to fight Noriega. So that he was home and the police talked to him at that point, but he wanted to fight Manuel Noriega, who was some kind of socialist or communist dictator in Panama back in the 90s. When police asked him if he was okay, he then began talking about the Persian Gulf, and he started to talk about the guy who was cutting up and torturing people. None of the details of the crimes had been released at that point. So that really was kind of a red flag about him to the police. On August 30th, 1990, Ed was home at Melbourne with his mother and his grandmother when he got into a violent argument with his 79-year-old grandmother, and he hit her. His mother called the police, and the police talked Ed's grandmother into filing charges, even though she didn't want to. Once he was in custody, it became clear to him when Gainesville agents showed up that he was being considered a suspect in the Gainesville murders. Ed was interrogated without a lawyer for more than 24 hours. If he was in the midst of a manic episode, it's just terrible. During questioning, he was hyper and he was easily suggestible. His older brother George visited Ed and asked Ed if he had done it, to which Ed began to cry and asked George how he could ask him that. Police released Ed Humphrey's name as the prime suspect. And this went on to ruin. Ed was already a very fragile person to begin with. And this really pushed him over the edge for a while. So the task force had trouble showing probable cause, though, to have a search warrant issued on him. And they found nothing. They found nothing that would indicate that Ed Humphrey was the one who was going around killing people. In the midst of all of this chaos, there was a man named Stephen Michael Bates who had been bragging about the Gainesville murders to other inmates. I guess he was in jail. To other inmates, and he implicated Ed Humphrey by name. But the police had already put Ed Humphrey's name out as a prime suspect. On October 10th, 1990, Ed was convicted of assault on his grandmother, and he was sentenced to 22 months at Chattahoochee State Hospital. So Chattahoochee State Hospital is in the panhandle of the state, and it's like one of Florida's big mental hospitals. Eventually, Ed's name was cleared because he had nothing to do with it. He was just he was a mentally ill individual who was not being treated properly or was not taking his medication properly. And because of his bizarre behavior, happened to be going on at the same time that these Gainesville murders were, people jumped to conclusion. But eventually his name was cleared. And then in 2000, he graduated from the University of Central Florida with a bachelor's in business administration with a 3.76 GPA. So it sounds like Ed went on to do not so bad for himself, which is great. On the final episode of this series, Danny Rawling, the killer cowboy crooner. Next time, we'll dive into the investigation into the Gainesville Ripper murders in more detail. We'll talk about how Danny Rawling was finally caught. We'll discuss his time in prison, his eventual execution, and we will also talk about all of the things that went wrong in Danny Rawling's life. Sort of a recap of his life of horror. Stay tuned after the closing if you are interested in listening to the rest of what Danny Rawling had to say on the recordings by the campfire. Join me next time as I continue to dissect the life and crimes of Danny Rawling, the Gainesville Ripper. You can follow the podcast on most of your social media platforms at SKBpod or visit the website at www.skbpod.com for more information about the show. If you're enjoying SKB, please take a moment to give it a 5-star review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spreaker, Podcast, whatever your podcatcher of choice is.
I don't know what people think anymore. All I know is I'm just one man alone in this world, facing the whole world by himself. And I'm sending this to the 3 people I love the most. I'll always love you. I love my mother. I love my father. And I love my brother. And no matter what anybody thinks about man, Danny Harold Rowland, I want these 3 people that I'm talking to right now to know that this is not the road that I really wanted. This is not what I wanted. But it is the road that is before me now. And I will walk it like and I'm so sorry, Dad. It rips my heart out by the roots to think what happened between you and I. I'm sorry, Pop. If it means anything, I'm so very sorry. And I suffer a lot behind this. I hurt in my heart. And it never goes away, Pop. I wish it was me instead of you. I wish it had happened to me instead of you. This isn't easy. Nothing's ever been easy for me. Well, I always wanted to make you proud of me, Dad, but somehow or another I always fell short. Well, I'll promise you this much. No matter what happens in the road ahead of me, at least I'll walk it as a man. I will do that. Mom, you are such a precious soul. There ain't a woman on the face of this earth that can cook like you can, sugar. You hear me? You got to be the best cook in the whole wide world. Believe you me, I'll miss it. I love you, Mom. I want you to know your boy's okay. I'm gonna be alright. Something I want you to know. And I want you to understand this.
The last time I saw you, I saw how much it hurt you to say goodbye to me. And you don't want you to purpose it in your mind, and in your heart, and in your soul. That I'm a man now. And God only knows, even God himself said that being a man wasn't easy. And oh, how well I know. It isn't easy. Like myself. Can't trust anyone. Can't be totally true. I have to always live this lie that I'm living. Mom, to be right, especially with the ones we love. But it doesn't always happen that way, does it, Mom? So we have to go on as long as there's breath in our body. We gotta go on, Mom. You gotta go on. You know, you're a very special woman. And oh, how well I know. And you know, I know Dad is so glad to have you. He picked him a DMI. Yeah, Pop. You got you a good one. And she got her a good one, too. You're a good man. Well, Mom, I want you to go on. What I'm trying to say is after this tape, you're not going to hear anything else from me. Just forget your own. I'm just saying, I want you to go on and live your life. I don't want you to have sleepless nights because of me. Do this for me, Mom. You deserve a hell of a lot more than the pain that I brought you. And I regret it with all my heart. But you know, if you want to make things easier on me, Mom, please, I'm asking you to go on. I love you. Go on and live your life and enjoy your life. For your life is your own. No one can take that from you. I love you, Mom. On this tape, I'm gonna sing every song I ever wrote. I'm gonna sing it to you, Mom. I'm gonna sing it to you, Dad. I know you wanted me to write good songs there, and you know I was going to. But instead, I'll sing them to you, Pop, if you want to listen. You probably hate me now, and I don't blame you for that, Dad. But maybe in the hereafter, when it's all said and done, I don't even understand myself half the time. But I know that there was once some good in me, and perhaps there is still a little. Because my heart can still be touched. Perhaps there's some hope in that. Kevin, I love you. You know, you said something to me that hurt me, made me wonder. Maybe you didn't know me as well as you thought you did. Maybe I didn't know you as well as I thought I did. Last time I saw you, you said that I enjoy this. You're wrong, Kevin. I hate this. I hate what's happened. I hate the way I have to live. I trade it all. I trade both my arms. If I could go back and do it all over, please believe me, I don't enjoy this. I'm not going to say that you're a good man because you can't handle it. You can't handle that. Wow. When your loved ones tell you how much they think of you. Why can't you accept that, brother? You are good. As good as men go. I know that we're all basically evil, but there is some good in you, Kevin. You said that you didn't care anymore. Don't say that, brother. Please. I beg you. As your brother speaking to you now, I know not what the future holds for me or for anyone. But I know that you care, Kevin, and you care a lot. Don't bottle up your feelings, brother. I know that it's easy to get hurt when when you wear your heart on your sleeve. It's easy for people to reach up there and grab it, squeeze it. Kevin's done a lot of good. Don't let what happened between Dad and me. I know it's got the family tore up, but hey, Mom and Dad need you right now. They need you now more than they ever have. And between the two of us, you were the strongest. I love you, Kevin. I love you, brother, more than even words can even justify. I wished it could have been different. I wanted so much for you and I to strike out together and make a dent in this world and make something out of our lives. It doesn't always happen that way, does it? No, I guess it doesn't. But I love you, brother. I want you to go home. I want you to have a good life. My life as it is not easy. But I will walk it until the Lord decides to take me home. I'll walk the road that is before me the best I can. And I've prayed and I've asked God. I've asked Him, I've said, dear Lord God of heaven and earth, I would rather be judged of you than judged of men, because I know the judgments of men and how it stinks. Man does not judge rightfully. And that system is the system of the devil. Civilization, it's not of the Lord. It's of the devil, brother. So I've asked God that if I am to be judged, not to be judged of men, but let me fall into the hands of my Maker, whom I still love and believe in. I'll always believe in my Lord and my Savior, Jesus Christ. Oh, Kevin, try to bring the family together, what's left of it. And I don't know why people nowadays are so hard on church. I know there's people there that are hypocrites. Blue sky that justifies not going to church and worshiping Him. Surely, if you give tithes and it goes into a man's pocket, that's not your fault. And the judgment does not lie upon you, but upon the man that took the money for wrongful purpose. Seek you out of church, brother, and take Mom and Dad. We've got to humble ourselves and come before God as He said, humble and meek like a child. And does a child think how the father should be? A little child loves his Maker, loves the Father, and looks to Him for everything. And no matter what, he loves Him. Try to get Mom and Dad to go to church with you. They need your prayers. You don't know how difficult it is. I haven't done without. No, I haven't done without. I'm well. I'm well fed, I'm well clothed, and I have a place to stay. Please look after Mom and Dad. And look after yourself. And maybe your prayers. Maybe you can touch the throne of God and His mercy and wisdom fill it down there. I don't know. I regret it all, but I can't change it. And I'm not going to deliver myself into the hands of men to be tormented by them, by men that are even lesser than myself. No, I'll go to my grave first. I love you, brother. Take care. Every song that I ever wrote to my family, for the three people that I love the most in this world, and the ones that probably I hurt the most. You good? Get this all together. snake hide, warm black leather. Mystery rider, what's your name? You're a killer, you're insane. Mystery rider, what's your game? You're a rebel, no one can tame. Welcome, stranger, to the Silver Dollar Ball. What's your pleasure? Pass the tender with a big cigar. Give me a whiskey, 'cause I'm a feeling a little risky. If that dim stars in town, well, you tell him I'm around. Mystery rider, what's your name? You're a killer, but you're insane. Mystery rider, what's your game? You're a rebel, no one can tame. Out on a windy, lonely street, just slinging 44s, what hell they finally meet. Fast as lightning, the two men will draw. The outlaw, he was the last thing he ever saw. Mystery rider, what's your name? You're a killer, but they're gone insane. Mystery rider, what's your game? You're a rebel, no one can tame. You're a rebel, no one can tame.